Au revoir.
Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of FitPet Boston Talks. My name is Leah Lodato, and I'm the host of the show. And today I'm sticking to the every Friday we are releasing a show schedule. So thank you so much for tuning in. If this is your first time listening, welcome. Thank you so much. It's awesome to have you here. If you were here, I'd shake your hand, but you're not. So if you are into what you're hearing, please like and subscribe on whatever platform you find yourself on. It really helps more people get the word out and get to hear the show. So historically, I have interviewed local Boston area dog handlers. We've chit-chatted about our lives, dogs, and careers. As of maybe like a year and a half ago, I've taken a step back from that mission and goal, and my spouse Laurie and I sit down and we do deep dives on specific dog training, handling topics. Sometimes we just talk about lifestyle stuff and enjoy a conversation with one another. But for the most part, this podcast is pretty doggy. So if you are interested in dogs, whether it's formal training, obedience training, competition training, or whether or not it's just like, I have a dog and I love dogs and I want to develop a better relationship with my dog, this podcast is for you. So what I wanted to do today, and I'm going to be solo today because we usually record the podcast on Thursday evenings, Wednesday or Thursday evenings. And tonight, Laurie and I really want to watch the Boys in the Boat movie. And if we record the podcast, I will not be able to stay awake for long enough to watch that movie. And it's been a really long week. So we really want to just sit down and veg out tonight. So I'm going to do this episode. I'm doing this episode as Laurie is teaching a class downstairs. So yes. And if she does text me and say, I need you to be a distraction, I'm going to pause and get up and do that. So I have my phone right in front of me just in case, but that's what the schedule is like for tonight. So it's just me today. And I do have something to say because something happened today while I was out for a hike, which triggered my memory of other clients kind of reporting back the same issue. So I thought today that I would talk a little bit about equipment and specifically e-collars and how to approach buying the correct, with quotation marks, e-collar for you, and then how to kind of refresh your memory when it comes to how to actually use the darn thing. Again, this topic was kind of triggered because I had an incident this morning. I have 2 customer stories to tell you. And on top of that, I have seen this topic come up multiple times on social media. I haven't read into any of the specifics of the recommendations from the people commenting, but the original post will say something like, what kind of e-collar is the best e-collar? So I wanted to start there. So what brand style of e-collar is the best e-collar? And if you don't know what an e-collar is, it's an electric collar. I'm not going to go into the nuts and bolts about e-collar training, yada, yada, but it's a tool that I use often with my own personal dog, with my clients' dogs while I'm hiking with them, and I teach people how to utilize the tool. So there are a bunch of different brands out there on the market. And if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you know that I am very slow to endorse a brand because I do think that there's something to be said for different strokes for different folks. And I'm not getting paid by any brand of dog food or brand of equipment or whatever to promote anything on the show. So I can tell you what I use and what I do. And then I always say, do you, boo, when it comes time to making those decisions for yourself. So I'm going to make a huge generalization right now. And I'm going to say, if you spend $200 or over $200 on an electric collar, it is probably a quality collar. By a quality collar, what I mean is it is going to give you a consistent level of stimulation over a decent range. Okay, so the number on the collar is going to correspond to the amount of stimulation that the receiver is going to receive. And that stimulation is going to stay pretty consistent over the distance that the collar claims it covers. So I've found that once you hit that like $200 mark with the e-collars, I'm not going to say they're all the same, because some of the more expensive ones have more bells and whistles that may or may not help. But generally speaking, the consistency of the stimulation is going to be pretty reliable if you spend that $200 or more on the collar. So the cheap Amazon electric collars, I really honestly would stay far away from those training tools, because the stimulation is oftentimes too high and oftentimes inconsistent. So they're made with lower quality components, and they just do not perform the way that we need them to for dog training. So that being said, what e-collars do I use? Personally, and e-collars that I sell through my business, if somebody is going to do a class, I use myself and sell the Mini Educator. So e-collar Technologies is the parent company. The Mini Educator is the collar. And well, I got to be honest with you. The reason why I use that training tool is, number one, it's the one I've always used, so I'm the most comfortable with it. Number two, they offer a wonderful incentive program for wholesalers. And number three, I find it to be a very affordable option when I compare other brands to the Mini Educator. There are some drawbacks to the Mini Educator. I'm really not going to go into them because I think that they're minimal. And I think that any drawback of the Mini Educator or any e-collar that you choose gets rectified with the owner making sure that they know how to actually use the collar. Okay, so I use the Mini Educator. That's the one that I choose to keep stocked. So if somebody wants to do classes with me, that's the one I have available to sell them. If somebody comes to me and they have a Garmin or a Dogtra or a Sport Doggie collar and they say, hey, I already bought this, I'll say, wonderful, let's use it. I know how to use those training tools as well. And I don't make my customers buy my product that I'm selling. I just make it available to them as part of the training package. So that brings me to my second point. So I've already established, okay, I think, and this is my opinion, the $200 plus is a quality e-collar that's going to give you the consistent stimulation you need over a distance. Great. What is the second criteria? The second point that I want to make is you have to make sure that as the handler, you familiarize yourself with the training tool. It doesn't matter if you have a Mini Educator or a Garmin or a Sport Dog or whatever. If you sit down with that thing and you learn how to use it, it is going to be exponentially more beneficial for you than if you just kind of know how to use it. So whatever is going to... I don't even want to say feel good in your hand. People love to say that. Pick whatever feels good in your hand. I think that that's baloney. It's just a training tool. You know what I mean? I think a lot of people shy away from the Mini Educator because it's that hockey puck and it just doesn't look as cool as a solid candy bar style remote. And in the long run, it doesn't matter. If you practice on that tool, you'll be able to use it quickly when you need it. And that's the most important thing about the training tool. It's not that you learn it's not that you learn the philosophy behind it. It's not that you practice repetitions. It's not, if you don't know how to make the buttons work, and if you can't do that quickly, the training tool is completely useless. So whether or not you get a e-collar that has an LED screen, or whether or not you get an e-collar that has a dial, or whether or not you get an e-collar with 2 buttons or 3 buttons or 1 button, it honestly does not matter as long as you sit down with that tool and you open the manual and you figure out how to use it. And I'm belaboring this because almost every single time somebody has an issue out in public, they flubbed up actually being able to administer the stim in a timely manner because they're just not They're not knowledgeable about the tool. So spend your money, familiarize yourself with the tool. And then the third thing is you have to practice. So just sitting there with the training tool and in the comfort of your living room while you're watching TV and knowing where the buttons are, knowing how to turn the stim up and down, knowing how to turn it on and off the receiver, all of those things are great. But if you don't actually practice with the training tool, you are not going to be as equipped in the moment as you would be if you actually practiced. So this is where I'm going to give my examples from my clients and also from myself. Taking a sip. Hang on. Okay, so today I'm going to give an example from myself. So today I was out with 3 dogs this morning, and I have the color of the collar on the dog correspond with the button on my e-collar. So I have a orange, yellow, black, and red collar on my dogs. And that corresponds with an orange, a yellow, a black, and a red button on my e-collar. It's very brainless, okay? This is a Mini Educator 900. Usually when I put the collars on the dogs in the car, I make a mental note, say, okay, Tucker's wearing red, Leo's wearing black, Heidi's wearing orange, Hamish is wearing yellow. Today, for some reason, I did not do that because I put the collar on Tucker when he was inside of his house or right outside his house, which is not part of my normal procedure for doing things. So when I let the dogs out of the car, I made a note of Blitz's collar, which was black, and I made a note of Piper's collar, which was yellow, and I did not make a note for Tucker's collar. So Tucker was away from me, and Tucker is a Portuguese water dog, and he has a propensity for eating things that he shouldn't be eating. So I saw him, and he found something really good. Like, I don't know if it was like a carcass or bones or something like this. And I called him to me, didn't come, and I was a few seconds late because I forgot what color collar he was wearing because I didn't make that mental note from the beginning. Was I worried he's going to run away from me? No. Did he come to me? Yes. It was just I looked down and I was like, dang, this is something that I do every day. And here I am, and I made this little mistake. And Cindy, if you're listening, Tucker's mom, Cindy knows how difficult it is to manage Tucker sometimes because he is probably one of the coolest dogs that I walk, but he loves to eat things that are unmentionable. So that was an example from myself today. So it just was a reminder to me that I need to pay attention. Now, you may be asking, well, heck, what if something had popped off? Why was it that you just didn't have the wherewithal to check in and make sure that you knew what color collar he was wearing? The fact of the matter is I barely use the tool with my clients, especially this group. The fact of the matter is I can't honestly remember the time I needed it because if I see Tucker looking down like he's going to eat something, if I just call him to me, he comes to me. I walk these dogs so much, it's kind of a no-brainer for them. So because I haven't been interacting with the tool with this group very much, I was rusty. Okay? So that's part of training. Part of training is being able to reinforce when you get a little rusty. So I had the remote in my breast pocket. It wasn't quick to access because I know it's fine. These dogs are so reliable. When I needed it, it took me a second to grab it, and then it took me an extra 3 seconds because I didn't know what collar Tucker had on, and there the window has closed. Second example I'll use from a client of mine. She has a dog that's very well trained. Recall, she said, Leah, I can't even tell you the last time I pressed any buttons or anything. I actually sold her a charger, and she admitted to me I don't even know the last time I charged this thing because she puts it on her dog. Her dog's an older dog, and she barely ever has to use the training tool, right? So her dog was in a park and started fence fighting with another dog on the other side of the fence and would not come when called. And she was like, I was pressing the button, but I was pressing the wrong button. And, it was fence fighting, and I had to go over and grab her, and I felt so dumb. I can't believe that this happened. And I had to say, yep, this is what happens. When we don't have to interact with the training tool, we're not prepared when we actually need to use it. Another example, somebody doesn't turn on the receiver. So every time I turn on a receiver, again, I use the mini educator, but many are the same. I just press the button a bunch of times when the receiver is not on the dog, just to make sure that that red light is lighting up and make sure that the receiver is getting stimulation, right? Because they are electric, they're electric and they break. It's just part of the way that things work. So I want to make sure that I kind of fire them up before I put them on the dogs to make sure that they're working. And I got an email to oh my God, my thing's broken. It's not working. And it probably just wasn't charged or wasn't turned on. This is the type of stuff that happens when you don't have to use it all the time. And also it was a client that has an older dog, and the e-collar itself is older. So the collar could very well have been malfunctioning, and she was saying I might need to buy a new one, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, well, talk to her on the phone. I was like, let's see if we can charge it up and see if it happens again. And then I was talking to her. She's like, okay, the button's working. I said, okay, it must have a little bit of a charge. Let's just see it. And she's like, yeah, it's working. So I must have something must have happened. Again, if we don't have to interact with the tool very much, we're less likely to be able to grab it, use it on the fly, and have that consistency. So those are kind of my 3 points. Find a collar that you like the price point above that $200 range. When you get it, sit down with it, learn how to use it. And then how do we address the third issue? So I have heard people espouse okay, we're just using the e-collar as a ripcord. My dogs I just keep it on them in case something happens, which is cool because the mentality is all right, it's going to be an emergency use only tool. It's going to be something that I can do if I really need to, but it's not something that I need to use all the time. That mentality is not bad, but it's not good either. Because if we have that mentality, we're getting closer and closer to not knowing how to use the tool because we never use it. So my suggestion would be, if your dog has the temperament for it, use the collar to reinforce other behaviors if that's something that you are comfortable with, so that you get used to using the tool and so that your dog can also have a better understanding of the tool. Because if you're only using the tool if you really need to, chances are that level of stimulation is probably going to be higher than the dog's working level of stimulation, right? You're probably going to have to get their attention. So being able to use the tool for other behaviors might be something that you might want to try if your dog has a temperament for it. I'm not going to go too far into it right now. Another thing that you can do is practice using the tool without administering stimulation. So set the collar on 0, if your collar can go to 0. And you can press the button when you would be using the stimulation. So tuck or come, tap, tap, turn, come. Or however you're using the e-collar. So you basically take away the power of the e-collar. You are still familiarizing yourself with the procedure, but you're not actually using the collar. If you're not comfortable with that, shut the remote off. Shut the remote off altogether. Let your dog run around in the yard with the receiver on, and practice utilizing the tools so your timing can be really good. Another thing that you can do if you're not comfortable with having the collar on is some e-collars you can adjust the button settings to be on a different remote. So let's say, for example, I have a mini educator and that collar can be used for 2 dogs. Well, if I only have 1 dog, there's going to be a dead button on that remote. So practice with the dead button on the remote. Tucker sit, stim, butt hits the ground, pressure goes away. Tucker come, tap, Tucker turns and comes to me. You're utilizing the tool without actually having to use the stimulation. It's one really great way to practice the timing of everything. Because if you don't have the timing right with the e-collar, it's useless. I'm telling you, it's like, you'll be staring at the remote like an idiot. And then I'm only saying that because I've done it before, especially when I was first learning how to utilize the tool, right? And as you can see today, I even had a little flub up today that I'm being vulnerable and sharing on the show. So another thing that you can do with the collar is practice with a person and not with your dog. So that's something that I do in the first class that I have with my clients. I practice with me and not the dog so that the client gets comfortable with the tool. Now, everybody is so good at armchair quarterbacking when another person is handling the leash or handling the e-collar. It's only until you get the tool in your hand and until you get the leash in your hand that you realize, like, oh crap, this is not as easy as it looks. And if you're afraid of the tool, or you're only using the tool if you really need to, but you don't even really know what that means, when you need to use it, it's not going to be there for you, is the bottom line. So really take the time to learn the equipment that you have. I am guilty of it too. I use the mini educator. I have 2 different models. Actually, I have 3 different models. And one of the other reasons why I like the e-collar technology brand is that they do make a smaller, low profile collar called the micro educator. From what I can tell, the stimulation is very similar to the mini educator, but it's a smaller receiver. And we get a lot of smaller doodle type dogs come through. And if they have a big honking thing hanging off of their neck, it's not as comfortable. So the contact points are a little bit closer together. It's a smaller, low-profile receiver. That's one of the models that I use. I use the mini educator for my clients' training, and then when I'm out in the woods, I use the candy bar style 900 series because it has more versatility and it can handle more dogs. And I hike with up to 4 dogs, and I can have 4 dogs on that receiver. So that's why I choose that training tool. Again, there are others that are comparable in quality, but not comparable in design. And people online will argue, as the day is long, what they think is best when it comes to their preference for e-collars. But again, consistent stimulation is the most important thing. Up like beyond that $200 price point, I think that the quality is there. Look at the bells and whistles. Guys, sometimes those bells and whistles are going to be more of a headache than they're worth. So you want functionality over everything else. If the collar is doing a bunch of things that you're never going to use, how useful is that? That's how I look at it. And in fact, the 900 series model, that has way more functionality than I use and that I ever will need to use. And I don't even know how to use all the functionality. I know how to use the parts that I need, and I'm very fluid at it. And when I say fluid at using the collar, I mean you can adjust the stimulation without having to look at the collar. So in the moment, something pops off, you need to use the tool, and you can do it without having to look at it. If you watch anybody that's using the collar for obedience, you're not going to see them staring at the collar because they know how to use it. It feels comfortable in their hand. So vitally important, and it's often overlooked. I see the glazed over look that people get in their eyes in that first e-collar class where I'm like, okay, this is how you charge it. This is how you turn it on and off. And then as they practice on me, either the person is like, why are we doing this? This is dumb. Or they're like, oh my God, I can't believe how challenging this is. And 9 times out of 10, the person that's sitting there that's like, this is so dumb, as the wheels start turning, they start realizing the challenges and they start realizing the importance of learning the tool. It's like an instrument, right? This equipment is like an instrument. It's vitally important that we know how to use it. Same could be said about the leash. I won't go into that because that might be a topic for another day. But a lot of people armchair quarterback when somebody from their family is handling the leash and we're trying to instruct, and then they get the leash in their hands and they're like, oh, this feels weird. And all of a sudden it's like they're trying to learn how to tango and they have 2 left feet. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say about the topic of what is the best, answering the question of what is the best e-collar. Again, I hope that you found some of this information, my perspective, useful / valuable / maybe you don't agree and you want to argue. That's cool too. I'm always up for it. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at FitPet Boston, at ABC Dog Training. FitPet Boston Talks is the podcast page on Instagram. Like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you next time.